Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And we are at the beginning of December 2026. Free agency filings were yesterday. We are not expecting to be major players in free agency this year, so I think the big activity in this episode is likely to be the Rule 5 draft and preparation for international amateur free agency. Once we get further through the offseason, if there's still some bargains to be had on free agency, we could get active then. I think we could potentially spend 10 to 15 million-ish dollars this offseason. You can see our player payroll is about 47.5 million right now. I think we could certainly take that up to the 60 million area and still be able to have scouting and player development be in the area that we'd like them to be. We have made a few offers in free agency. You can see we've made a lot of offers to some minor leaguers to start bolstering our AA and AAA clubs in particular, where we lost a fair amount of players this offseason. And I have also thrown lowball offers at a few of the better pitchers out there, the Rasmussens, Alcantaras, Lizardos of the world, along with a few of the more interesting relievers. None of them accepted those offers, did not expect them to, but if they linger on the market, that may at least encourage them to come back to us if their price gets a little lower. I tend to think that these big pitchers will be gone relatively soon. We have made one significant offer since our last episode, though, and I'll talk about that shortly. First, just wanted to, if I can go to the proper space, talk about the development lab. And Patrick DeBonis brought up a good point. He wasn't thrilled that we did the endurance training with Mason Miller, with Miller at this point coming off of a pretty significant injury that cost him a year and a half and dropped his injury proneness to fragile. He would have went with the strength and conditioning program instead. And I really can't argue with his logic. The reason I'm doing this, I'm just trying to roll the dice and get really lucky with Miller. You may remember 2 years ago when we did the endurance training with him, we got an outstanding result that improved his stamina. And with the outstanding result, it also supposedly helped his health a bit. And I was hoping to go for the twofer and get really lucky and hope that maybe we got the outstanding result on endurance training and we were able to get him a little boost to his strength and conditioning that way. Certainly no guarantees that that will happen, and probably should have just went for the pure strength and conditioning, which would have been a more straightforward and potentially larger improvement to his health if it worked out. But it is what it is at this point, and at least we are on track for hopefully some success with this program. And the reason I talk about Mason Miller is that, and I know some of you aren't going to like this, but off of the fact that he pitched 17 pretty solid games for us as basically a 5-inning starter after he came back from that injury, and the fact that he's not looking for a ton of money this year, and his arbitration number next year isn't particularly high either. I know some of you have been encouraging me to trade Miller away, but we have actually made a pretty significant contract offer to him, $50 million over 7 years. The deal is front-loaded, my thought being that we'll overpay him these next couple arbitration-eligible years when we're still likely not a true contender and also have a relatively small budget. And then if things go well and Miller stays healthy and our A's become a bit more contenders, the numbers for him in the out years will be a bit lower. And then we also, as I like to try to do, have team options for the final couple years that we've offered to him at the end in case things go really bad. We give ourselves an out at some point. It's kind of a bold move for a guy who's had the significant injuries that Miller has had. That being said, if we can lock him up for an average of a little more than $7 million a year through his arbitration years and a few free agency years, and he happens to perform really well, that becomes a very valuable contract for us, either as a trade chip or just as someone who should be outperforming that contract, likely as one of the top members of our rotation. So a little bit of a gamble. We'll see what he comes back with in the coming weeks as we prepare to head for the winter meetings and the Rule 5 draft. And we have gotten Miller signed to that deal that I mentioned. So we'll take a look at the specific details here for the 28-year-old who's fragile but has electric stuff when he is healthy and still touches triple digits. Mentioned 7 years, $50 million front-loaded. So after he plays out this year, he'll be at $10 million for the first year of this deal, and then you can see it comes down $1 million a year till those final team options at the end. As I said, this is a gamble, but I think we're going to need to take some gambles with this Oakland A's team. It's not money that's going to cripple us. It's not going to feel great if it goes bad those first couple years and we're spending 15% of our payroll on someone who's not producing for us. But it's not a number that will cripple us. It's not a number that we wouldn't be able to trade away to a team with a bigger budget. And if Miller stays healthy, if we're successful in the development lab with him this year, maybe we send him through the strength and conditioning program next year and bolster him even further. It's a contract that could deliver a ton of excess value to Oakland if things work out well. No guarantee that things will work out well, but we're going to have to, given the payroll constraints we're operating under, get lucky with some players. And I think one way to try to do that is to sign players a little early or sign players when they have questions and hope that more often than not those contracts work out for us. And we'll certainly find out in the coming years whether or not that methodology and plan do work out or don't work out. And with the winter meetings starting in just a few days, we finally gotten scouting reports back on 3 of the international free agents that we thought might be interesting. Erasmo Ramirez, actually he's not, he's a minor leaguer we just signed. If I could pull up the right reports, that would be helpful. Luis Figueroa is the first baseman coming from Cuba, looking for only $1.5 million, but right now he's only looking for a major league contract. I think he looks like kind of a 4A kind of player, like his ability to draw some walks, and I think he could be a useful-ish bat against left-handed pitching, although looking at his rating splits, he's pretty much just as effective against righties and lefties, even though he's a right-handed hitter. More interesting guys were Edgar Pulido, starting pitcher, 28 years old. Certainly could see him as a useful rotation piece. However, he's still looking for about $12 million a year. 28 years old. He only throws in the low 90s, does have some positive personality traits. He's a guy that we made a 1-year offer to. He's looking for a multi-year contract. He was not interested in our 1-year low offer, but maybe we'll keep the discussion going with him. And similarly, we also made a 1-year lowball offer to Yoshitoko Matsuura with the odd nickname Weird Hand. Think he could be a pretty interesting third baseman with that power and a pretty solid defensive profile for a third baseman. But at this point, he's looking for over $20 million a year and for many years. So he will only be a member of the Oakland A's if his price comes down significantly. And our 2-month rental from last season, Jesus Luzardo, just signed with the Angels. Looks like he's going to be making $17 million a year for 6 or 7 years. That was not a deal that we could get involved in. Fortunately, the fans upset that our rental moved on, and we took a 3-point hit to fan interest from 38 to 35, even though we did not get a commensurate increase when we traded for Luzardo as a rental. Apparently, our fans are dim-witted. And Luis Robert Jr. is one of the guys we threw a early and low offer at, and you can see he's now signed with San Francisco, 5 years, almost $110 million total. So again, not a number that I think Oakland would be in the mix to pay, especially given his fragility and the fact he'll be turning 30 next season. And it's the first day of the winter meetings. Unfortunately, we didn't get as lucky in the draft as we did a year ago when we moved up significantly. Looks like we'll be picking 14th this year in round number 1. So probably right about where you would expect us to be picking, given our 80 and 82 record last year. And another rental from last season gone, Robert Stevenson, who was a rental who was with us for all of 27 games, did a solid job for us as a closer, and another 1-point hit to our fan interest from the loss of Mr. Stevenson. So at least that was not as significant as we experienced with the loss of Mr. Luzardo. And we made it to the start of the Rule 5 draft, where we'll be picking number 13. Hopefully we can find a little bit of help. Thus far in this playthrough, the first few Rule 5 drafts, we've found some interesting-ish pitchers. Seems like in previous versions of the game, every few seasons we've been able to find a youngster, kind of a 23, 24-year-old guy who's a borderline major league player today, but has been interesting enough for us to spend a roster spot on for a year, because if they fully reach their potential, they could be a useful major leaguer for us. Haven't seen as many of those younger guys thus far, but we are only in the third plus year of this playthrough, so still kind of some time for perhaps some of the fictional players from IAFA classes in recent drafts to develop into guys who might not be protected by their teams in the Rule 5. And we're at the Rule 5 draft, ready to make our pick, and there's a guy that we like, but do kind of just want to show something here that I think is a problem with the game that's been brought up on the message boards and still doesn't look like it's fixed. There's an 18-year-old Jong Sop Kim who's available in the Rule 5 draft. He was in high school in Korea about 18 months ago. Looking at his history, he was drafted in the Korean leagues, then released. Then he signed a deal with the independent leagues. His contract was purchased by the Cardinals organization back in April. And he did spend a little bit of time with the Cardinals rookie league team this year. Does not make sense to me that an 18-year-old should be available in the Rule 5 draft. I know that there's been some discussions on the message boards about this, and the OOTP stands have kind of tried to come up with a rationale for why this is technically accurate. It doesn't make sense to me. I think it's something that OOTP likely has wrong. Not the end of the world, since I'm not going to take the guy, and he's not a huge prospect, but it does seem a little weird for an 18-year-old with 1 year of rookie ball who was in high school a year ago to be available in the Rule 5 draft. And just one of those little things that frustrates me about the game. We've obviously talked earlier this episode about the issues with rental players as far as fan interest. And it seemed in the initial versions of OOTP 25 that had been addressed a bit, but with this latest and most recent patch, it almost seems like that's gone in a bad direction. I'm still a bit frustrated that the game has been out for over 2 months at this point, and they still don't have an updated manual for OOTP 25 on their website, especially given a lot of the new features like the development lab and the development training programs with the sliders. Obviously, I have a lot of respect for the development team at OOTP, and I enjoy the game immensely, or I wouldn't be playing it as frequently as I do. But it does seem like there's a lot of corners that are being cut recently, which is a bit concerning to me as someone who is more focused on the general manager and organization development aspects of the game rather than a perfect team or whether the animations of the 1998 graphics in the outfield are a little better or not. But I will get off my high horse and move on. We are going to be making a pick of Victor Araño. He's making $2.4 million this year, but certainly has a pretty interesting profile with plus stuff, plus movement and average control. 3 pretty good pitches, extreme ground ball tendencies, throws in the mid to high 90s. Spent all of last year in AAA Norfolk in the Orioles organization. But if you look at his major league career, he's had 5 different seasons in the majors across 3 different organizations with a 1.24 ERA plus and an 83 FIP minus. He's always had a FIP minus better than league average. Certainly think he could be a useful right-handed arm out of our bullpen. We've got some money to spend, and it's a free look. If we spend the money differently and we just want to send him back coming out of spring training, we've got the opportunity to do that as well. But we will bring Victor into our organization here in the first round of the 2026 Rule 5. And second round, I'm actually going to go with our scout's recommendation. He suggested we take a player, and I'm going to go with him. Jace Young, pretty much the definition of a average-ish major league bat, but does have a little potential pop and a decent eye. Competent-ish defensively at third base and first base. Looks like he could be a useful-ish bat against right-handed pitching. We talked a lot in the last episode about how we've got a lot of guys in that 23, 24, 25, 26, 27-year-old range who are potential second baseman, third baseman for us, who are going to get a shot on the roster this year with the fact that we've moved on from some older players with the exception of Nick Ahmed in the infield, and Cameron Cawley is going to miss the first half of the year most likely. That said, I think there's still no guarantee that Young makes our 26-man roster, but happy to bring him into camp and let him compete with the other guys. In third round of the Rule 5, we're going to bring in another pitcher, Ben Leeper, 29-year-old out of the Cubs organization. Above average stuff, decent movement and control, excellent fastball and slider, throws in the triple digits. He is, at the age of 29, never gotten a shot in the majors. Had a rough year last year in AAA, but his Sierra was a run and a half better than his actual ERA. No guarantees he's going to make the team, but happy to bring a guy with that type of 100-mile-an-hour talent that you can't really teach into camp to at least compete for a spot in our bullpen. And in the fourth round, with the final pick we're going to make in the Rule 5 draft this year, we're going to go with a name that's familiar to those of you who were with us a year ago when we were doing our Buffalo Wings series in Out of the Park Baseball 24. Jace Barofin, who was the first round draft pick in the history of that Buffalo organization, actually happens to be with the Buffalo Bisons in the Toronto Blue Jays organization. Made it up to AAA last year. Looks like he could be a competent defensive outfielder with a little bit of pop in his bat. Could be a borderline useful arm against right-handed pitching, depending on whether we make any other trades or moves this offseason. Certainly no guarantees that he's going to be making the 26-man roster, but we are happy to bring Mr. Barofin into camp with us. And sitting here on December 29th, Sean Manaea is one of the guys that we made an offer to about almost a month ago at this point, and he's come back to us wanting to talk. The left-handed pitcher still has above average stuff, pretty good control. Concern is that he does give up a lot of home runs, potentially being a fly ball pitcher with modest speed and tendency to give up a few more gopher balls than normal. That said, he's been pretty much a league average pitcher over the course of his career, which started, of course, in Oakland, where he spent about half of his time in the majors at this point. Says he's looking for $5.5 million. Only looking for a 1-year deal right now. Don't know that I want to give him the $5 million he's looking for. And I think if I do give him a deal, I'd like to have an option year or two on top of it for us in case things work out well. But I do feel that although I like Miller at the top of our rotation, I'm pretty comfortable with Clark Schmidt. J.P. Sears did a nice job for us last year. And Mitch Spence has been good for us, although he missed all of last year with an injury. We still definitely have at least one spot in the rotation behind those four guys. And Manaea's not a horrible guy to bring into camp on a small deal that's not a long-term commitment, given that I think he could potentially help us as a fourth or fifth starter. And I don't know that Manaea is going to love this offer, but he's the one who's come back to us hat in hand. He was looking for 1 year, $5 million with a promised role in the starting rotation. We're offering him 3 years, a total of $12 million with team options for those second and third years. So a pretty team-friendly contract for less money and a less defined role than he's looking for. He seems pretty willing to talk right now, so I don't think this will cause him to completely cut off the conversation. But I also am not sure if he's going to bring it back to his family for consideration. Interesting. Said he's glad that we've decided to return to the negotiation table. He acknowledges our last offer, but he's not really saying what he'd want different. So I think at this point, we're just, we'll ask him for a response again in case I clicked something improperly, but I don't think I did. Oh, maybe I did. So he's willing to think about it. I think it's a pretty low risk deal for us. Worst case scenario is we pay him $3.9 million for this upcoming year when we've kind of got money to spend and not a ton of interesting options. And if he holds up well into his mid to late 30s, we've got the options for him after that. So we'll submit that offer to the Annihilator and see what happens. And I meant to mention this, but forgot to. But when I was making the original offer offline several weeks ago to Mania, one of the things that was attractive to him, in addition to the fact that I think he could potentially help our team this coming year, was that he's also an extremely popular player both nationally and locally. So although we find ourselves on that fan interest treadmill right now with the positives and then it seems in many cases the larger negatives when teams or players leave, still kind of a game that we have to play a little bit to hopefully get fan interest moving in a better direction and to hopefully ultimately get the fan loyalty back up to pathetic from minimal. And Manai is a guy who might be able to help us do that. You can see with the lower ticket prices for season tickets that we had put in place following the drop in fan loyalty, we were hoping that would help us get season tickets and attendance to be potentially better than they were last year, but that drop in prices is not necessarily significant enough, it doesn't seem. It's counterintuitive to good fan relations and good financial management, but I think my plan is to keep the ticket price at $26 until we get through selling of the season tickets in the start of the season, and then likely drop it another couple dollars after that to put some additional fans into the seats when the season gets going. We do have a longer term goal to improve our attendance by the end of the 2028 season, so could start making some progress there, but certainly counterintuitive to charge your most loyal customers more money than those who will less consistently be supporting your product. But nobody said the financial engine was perfect. And we're now about 2 months away from the end of the 3 to 4 month programs that we were running with everyone we put into the development lab this year. Duncan Marston still on track to improve his pitch movement. Lawrence Butler on track to improve his gap power. Will Banfield on track to improve his plate discipline. And Mason Miller is excelling in that endurance training. So maybe our rolling the dice and getting greedy with the program we put him on, maybe our stupidity will pay off once again. You never know. And we've made it to the beginning of the international amateur free agent signing period. The first 2 times that we've been able to do this in this playthrough, we've tended for, I don't want to say a shotgun approach, but we've definitely tried to bring in multiple prospects rather than one dream superstar prospect. We'll take a look at the 10 guys that we've most recently had in our camp that we're thinking about most seriously, and then decide whether we're going to try to go for a couple guys this year or just try to assure ourselves one big-time player, given that we're tied for the most money to spend in all of baseball with $5.7 million. I think we can certainly get one guy if we really want him, but we might get greedy and try to bring a couple into our organization. I have offline explored trading for a little bit more IAFA cash. The prices right now are just realistic, even for just a couple $100,000. So maybe something we need to pursue more seriously as a supplement down the line, but not anything I'm going to aggressively go after right now. The only pitcher that we're still bringing into camp is Juan Padilla, who looks like he could be a pretty good one. 17-year-old, ground ball tendency, throws in the low to mid 90s, could potentially have well above average stuff, movement, and control. Going to need to work on preventing the home runs and improving his control, but you can say that about a lot of young pitchers. Concern is that it's only a 3-pitch arsenal at best, and you're going to need that changeup to develop for him to be a starter. But do think that if everything works out, Mr. Padilla could be a very interesting starting pitcher. And turning to the nine everyday players we most recently had in camp, we'll start with the two who are a little lower regarded prospects. Nelson Del Rio, shortstop out of Venezuela. The glove is okay-ish. Looks like he's probably really a third baseman in the most logical scenarios, but does look like he could have a pretty interesting bat. Left-hander with good home run power. A guy who I'm potentially intrigued by, depending on what our strategy, that is not looking for a lot of money, only 1.7 mil, only 170,000, and there's not a lot of league interest in him, is Arturo Calleros. Like the high work ethic, he's a corner outfielder who's barely competent defensively, but could have slightly above average contact, gap power, and home run power, and a potentially borderline incredible ability to draw walks. So I think if we end up in a situation where we have a couple $100,000 left to sign players after we make our first big move or two, Calleros may be somebody that we focus on trying to pick up later this month or in early February if he's still on the market. And the final 7 position players that we've had into training camp most recently, and in most cases, all 4 of our training camp sessions, are higher rated prospects who we generally have pretty good relationships with. Interesting one is Juan Contreras, only because league interest in him is also low. We've got a very strong relationship with him, and he's looking for less than $2 million. Like the high leadership, work ethic, and intelligence. Looks like a competent-ish infielder at a number of positions, and looks like he could have a pretty interesting bat. Probably more of a fallback option, more similar to Mr. Calleros, but coming out of this with one of the top prospects, potentially plus a Contreras and Calleros, would not necessarily be a bad result for us if that's how things emerge. Ernesto Vela, another shortstop. Don't necessarily love the defensive ratings, given that he's below average in everything except his infield range. Now, he'll get to a lot of balls with that plus range, which is positive. He's durable in terms of his injury proneness and should draw a decent number of walks and could hit a crazy number of homers. Question is going to be making contact and avoiding the strikeouts. And unfortunately, his potentially interesting gap power is counteracted a bit by mediocre speed. Edgar Soto, a first baseman out of the Dominican, just a pure bat, contact and power, both above average, but no speed, no real ability to play anywhere defensively. Darwin Ramos, a second baseman, is a little more interesting to me. Don't love him defensively. Do like the high work ethic, decent speed, potentially excellent contact, and above average home run power. So he's another guy who certainly could be in the mix. And then the top 3 everyday prospects that we haven't talked about yet. Shortstop Jesus de la Campa, looking for $2.6 million. He is, for those of you who watched our Buffalo Wings series and appreciated the callback to Jace Barofin, De La Campa with his excellent contact, potentially well above average gap power, lack of home run power, pretty mediocre batting eye with really good speed, and an interesting defensive combination, is not Deshaun Seifu, but he's not a horrible proxy for Deshaun Seifu. Doesn't have the same speed that Deshaun Seifu, who we picked first overall and ended up having a Hall of Fame career with our Buffalo Wings, did. But he's honestly potentially better defensively, and still looks like there's a pretty good chance that he'll be a perennial 300 hitter. Question is how much higher that on-base percentage will be than the batting average, but do also like his high work ethic. So he's certainly in the mix of someone to think about. Juan Porras, a first baseman, another guy who is just a hitter, but with that high work ethic and the fact that we see him potentially having well above average contact and borderline off the board home run power, along with a decent batting eye, is a pretty interesting combination as well. And last but certainly not least is the guy who we mentioned back in October that we thought was the most interesting prospect of the bunch. And you can see we've got very high scouting accuracy on him now. He's obviously been to all 4 of our camps. League interest is off the charts with him, but our relationship is also very strong with him. And that's the shortstop Alejandro Landin. Not much to not like about him. The big knock on him is the lack of speed. But other than that, he's got a great personality. Looks like he could be a pretty solid defensive infielder. Well above average contact, well above average power, good batting eye, and we don't care that the gap power is kind of his weakest basic batting rating, because with the lack of speed anyways, we're not expecting a lot of extra base hits from him. But a switch hitting middle infielder who looks like he could certainly be above average offensively, who's also potentially a very interesting defensive player. Could play short, could play second, could potentially be a borderline Gold Glove caliber third baseman. And he could also play a corner outfield spot in a pinch. Flea Landin is still a pretty attractive prospect as far as I'm concerned. Question is whether I like him more enough than everybody else to just dump most of our money at him right now. And I'm going to roll the dice and try to thread a needle this year that I don't think I'm going to be able to thread. We've had a lot of luck going for 2 players that we like a lot and offering 10-20% more than they're looking for to each of them. That's how we got very quickly the 2 guys that we made offers to last year. But the guys that I'm going to try to bring on this year are Mr. Landin and Mr. De La Campa, who are combined looking for $5.2 million. And I just don't know if we're going to be able to overbid enough on each of them to get them both on board. I tend to think we probably won't. There is a part of me that says if we overbid a little more strongly on Landin right now and pair him up with someone like Juan Contreras, we might be able to get both of those guys without any further negotiation. I think it's probably a 10% probability that we're going to be able to get Landin and De La Campa. And because we're also not going to be able to go as hard as Landin with the offer as I'd originally like, it's very conceivable that he's going to be coming back to us, and we may end up having to go to the max for him, or we may just even have to get to, a $4.5, $5 million number on him that will take us out of the running for some of these other guys that we like. But I always like to try something different and try to learn a little more about what works and what doesn't work, and hopefully help you learn those things as well. So since Landin is the guy that we really care about more, we're going to overbid by $400,000 for him, give him a $3 million offer, and see if maybe we can get lucky and lock him up at that number. In a perfect world, I'd really like to be more of $3.25, $3.3 million on him, and I'd feel a lot of confidence that we were going to get him. But since we're going to try to just blow this IAFA period out of the water with an incredible result, we wanted to save enough money to overbid a little bit on Jesus de la Campa, looking for $2.6 million. All we've got to offer him is $2.7 million, so not much of an overbid at all. But we're going to submit that offer to him as well. As I said, I think we're flying a little too close to the sun with these offers this year, and it's conceivable that they're both going to come back to us and say that they want more money. Whereas if, for instance, we had offered 3.5 to Landin from the start, and then maybe offered $2.2 million to Contreras right now, we'd have a better chance of landing both of those guys. But given that we do have the $5.7 million, I feel if things don't work out, I can always just throw all that money at Landin and still at least land the player that I like the most in this class. And as I said, I think there's some probability that we get them both, but admittedly, I don't think we're going to be successful with this, but it's always interesting to try something different and to push the envelope a little further than you have in the past. And we've had some interesting things happen. Not surprisingly, De La Campa, who we were only $100,000 more than his offer, says he wants more money. Supposedly Landin favors the $3 million offer right now. So if we're able to lock him up at that number, it's hard to imagine that this IAFA period is not going to be a smashing success. But that can still change. The real interesting thing is that Sean Manaya's come back to us, and sounds like he's okay with the money. But he wants to be promised a closer role for our team. I don't know if that works for us. I think the reason to bring Manaya on board is to have him be a starter. So I'm going to have to think about that one a bit. I do think he could help us. And Manaya's also looking for more money right now, so I think I may just hold tight for the time being. I think we're definitely going to want some help. We still want one more different guy in our rotation. Right now, I think our fifth starter would probably be Nick Frasso if we don't make any other moves, which is fine, but not great. And although the big pitchers are off the market at this point, unfortunately, there certainly are guys who could fill a number 5 hole for us, except for Manaya. Wouldn't mind bringing Walker Buehler on board, but he's still looking for, it says $16.8 million a year, but talking to him, he's actually still looking for over $20 million a year. So I don't think that's a realistic player for us to pursue. But there's some familiar names in Garcia, Herman, and Giolito who have been on our team in the past, in the not-so-distant past. Tyler Mahl also could probably fill in for us as a number 5 starter. I do like the stuff that Manaea brings. I'm not going to give him $7 million a year, and I'm going to want to set it up so that there's a team option on that second season. But I'm willing to pay him a little more than we had offered. But if he doesn't go for this and we end up with a fallback option for a 4th or 5th starter, I don't think it's the end of the world. And he wants $7 million a year over 2 years. We're offering him $5.5 million a year over 2 years with a team option on the second season. Says he's willing to think about it. We'll see what happens with Manaea, as well as the IAFA class. And unfortunately, but perhaps not unexpectedly, Landine has also come back and says that he's got a better offer than what we were going to give him on the table as well. So certainly time to pivot on the IAFA class. Looks like the pitchers are largely signed already, which is crazy. Landine looking for big money right now, $4.68 million. We are going to see what Mr. Calleros is looking for here as a fallback option. Says he's only looking for $110,000. So we don't need to save a ton of money for him. What I don't want to do is give him $150,000 and feel like I got a good bargain and then find out that we actually needed to go to the $5.7 million to get Landine. So I'm going to have to be a little more aggressive with getting an offer out to Landine right now and not boxing myself into a position where we have another offer that's been accepted that keeps us from being able to ensure that we get Landine. So he's looking for 4.68. We're going to try to just put an end to this right now, offer him $5 million. Actually, we're going to offer him $5.25 million. Still would leave us with $450,000, enough to go bargain hunting. But I'd rather get him right away and maybe save a little bit off the 5.7. So we're going to go ahead and submit that offer to Flea and see if perhaps that one member of the Red Hot Chili Peppers is willing to join our team next year. And Landine said he liked our offer, but now he's come back and says we have to offer them more than the $5.7 million that Colorado has offered him. Don't know that we can do that, but we'll offer him every penny we have at this point to match Colorado and hope for the best. Would love to bring him on board. Was hoping we wouldn't have to spend every penny we have to make it happen, but at this point, I hope that we're at least successful with that. Still are fallback options: Porras, Ramos, Soto, Calleros, Del Rio, but Landine is the guy that we really wanted from the start, so we've offered him every penny we can, and now we just see if hopefully the very strong relationship we have with him is better than the relationship he has with the Rockies and anyone else who's also offered him the max. And Mr. Fisher has kept our budget at $126 million here as the preseason begins. Mr. Landine did say that unless someone offers him a better deal, he'll sign with us. Well, nobody can offer him more than the $5.7 million that we've offered him, so we'll see whether or not Alejandro is a young man of his word or not. And good news, we did get Sean Manaea signed. Hopefully he can play a pretty prominent role in our rotation this year. The third baseman from Japan, Yoshitoki Matsuura, did end up signing with Seattle over $18 million a year for 7 seasons. Got the opportunity to opt out after 2 years, so that was not a contract that we'd be able to compete with. But got a decent bump from bringing Manaea on board. I think that was 5 points. I believe we were at 34 the last time I checked in. So that is one piece of positive news. Now we just have to wait and find out whether or not we'll be able to bring in Alejandro Landin, who I believe is the best international amateur free agent in this year's class. And Alejandro Landin did sign the deal with us, so that is positive news. Spent every penny that we had to bring him on board, but as I talked about, he checks just about every box. Switch hitter, good defensively, great personality, and potentially an excellent hitter. Only criticism is his lack of speed and bunting ability, but everything else, we think he's top-notch. So pretty excited to have the guy who we thought was the top prospect out there locked up here in the 2027 IAFA period. Would have loved if we could have brought him and someone else on board, but we've done that 2 straight years. And as it turned out this year, to get the guy that we really liked, we had to spend every penny we had. And with Manaea and Landin both signed, time to call it an episode here on January 28th. Did just make an offer to Nico Horner, who's no longer looking for a major league contract. I'm still intrigued by Eloy Jimenez, but is a right-handed hitter who could be a pretty devastating and useful bat against left-handed pitching. I'd love to have him on the team, but $11 million a year for a few seasons for a guy who, in a perfect world, is starting 40 or 50 games a year for us is more than I'm willing to pay. But I think there are some interesting-ish players to bring on board. I know Jake Bowers was mentioned in the comments to the last episode as a left-handed bat who could certainly provide us with a little bit of pop against right-handed pitchers. Since he's now no longer looking for a major league contract, we'll certainly throw a minor league offer out to him. There's definitely some other players here that I'll be making minor league offers to offline as well between now and the next episode as we try to rebuild our farm system. Pitching-wise, still definitely some guys who could help us. Walker Buehler still out there. Luis Garcia's price is coming down. Herman, do we reunite with him? Probably don't reunite with Giolito with the declining stuff and the declining velocity. Tyler Mahle, not really all that expensive at this point. There's definitely some interesting guys to throw into the mix, and with the exception of the guys like Jimenez and Buehler that are still looking for crazy money, with a payroll of $55 million and $6 million-ish to spend, with scouting and development budgets that are similar to a year ago, and enough in our draft budget right now, we can potentially add a body or two. If we don't, and I'm able to give us a little more flexibility in the draft budget, while maybe bumping scouting and development up further as we get closer to the start of the season, that would be fine as well. So we've got some interesting decisions to make in the next episode. If you've got some thoughts on what we should do as we get ready for the season, always helpful to hear them. Before we finish things up, let's just check in on the development lab one last time. Little over a month away. Looks like we're doing a little better Rodas and Marston are both on track with their programs. Lawrence Butler still on track with his gap power. And Mason Miller continues to excel with that endurance training. But we got another month to go on that. So we'll find out what happens with those players in the lab, as well as what we end up doing over the last month or so of the off season and during spring training in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.